Welcome to the Modern Husbands podcast, where any combination of Dr. Ross, Christian Sherrill, and Brian Page host national experts who share winning ideas to manage money in the home as a team. Today, we welcome Dr. Scott Rick, who is an award-winning teacher and researcher at the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business. Dr. Rick received his PhD in behavioral design research, and his research focuses on understanding the emotional causes and consequences of consumer financial decision-making, with a particular interest in the behavior of tightwads and spendthrifts. Dr. Rick is the author of the forthcoming book, Tightwads and Spendthrifts, Navigating the Money Minefield in Real Relationships, which is what we will be talking about today. Enjoy the show. Dr. Rick, we have very much been looking forward to speaking with you. You're such an expert in this area, and this is a timely conversation with your new book coming out, Tightwads and Spendthrifts, Navigating the Money Minefield in Real Relationships. And we're really excited to be able to dive into what you wrote about and share with our listeners your wisdom, obviously, and then make sure that they're aware where to buy your book. I know that I've already pre-purchased one. I can't wait to get it in the mail. So again, thanks. We really appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you so much. I'm excited.
Let's start with, if you don't mind, you telling us a little bit about the psychology of tightwads and spendthrifts.
So they're interesting types. They differ in how painful they find the experience of spending money, particularly for optional purchases, things that are non-obvious, unlike, say, paying a parking ticket or things you have to do. But tightwads experience a lot of distress when they're considering spending money, and a little too much for their own good. They often look good on paper. You would not know that they were a tightwad if you looked at like their bank account numbers, but they often don't feel very comfortable, even if they look comfortable on paper. So they're, there's a character in the story Love in the Time of Cholera. He grew up poor, but he became rich, and someone told him like, "Oh, well, you're a rich man," and he said, "I'm not rich. I'm a poor man with money," which is not the same thing. So it's hard to kind of shake this protective response that was developed in times that felt tight, even when the numbers improve. So they usually spend less than they think they should, and they have some regrets about that. They wish they would have taken their spouse out to a nice anniversary dinner when they know their spouse likes going to nice places, but they couldn't bear to pay the money, so they went to Ruby Tuesday, and the spouse was unhappy and they were unhappy, and they just live with a lot of that regret. So it's not like a wonderful thing to be. And then there's spendthrifts. I'm on that side of things where we don't have enough distress or anxiety when thinking about spending money. It's like somebody cut our brake lines. We just don't have the stop signal working. And we approach spending very differently. Like, we're not just shopping for our needs, we're shopping for our potential needs. So maybe if I buy this nice thermos, I'll start taking coffee into the office instead of buying it at the cafe downstairs. Or like, oh, I like this suit. Maybe I'll get it in a few different colors because maybe I can find places to wear it. It's like, I don't even have the events on the calendar. It's just like, well, maybe. And so like our thinking is, I'm stealing this from a different podcast called Ask Rana. It's life advice, but they say I'd rather be looking at it than looking for it. I'd rather kind of have it on me just in case than be without it when I might need it. So that's, neither of these are like ideal. There are people in the middle. We call them unconflicted consumers. They have some pain when they think about spending money, but they more or less spend what they think they should be spending, and they tend to be happier than the two extremes.
So should we be thinking this as like a spectrum or a continuum that you're on?
Oh, yeah. So we have this like spendthrift tightwad scale to kind of see where you are on this continuum. And most people kind of group in the middle, the unconflicted consumers. But there's a kind of a healthy number. It ranges depending on what sample, but around 25% in the tightwad area, around 25% in the spendthrift area. Yes.
So, as obviously we talked about, my background is in marriage therapy, and so I wonder, I'm intrigued by this. And so, do we tend to marry people with similar feelings towards spending money, or is this an instance, where opposites attract?
Yeah, I think very often we marry ourselves. We like most things about ourselves, and we kind of run in similar circles anyway. There's a lot of homophily just in life. So like-minded people tend to find each other. But there is this thinking that if you don't like something about yourself, it's really kind of distressing to see your flaws play out in another person. It really shines a spotlight on it. That's true with spouses. It's true with kids. Like if you have a bad thing and you see your kid doing it, it's like, ugh, it really just kind of makes you uncomfortable. And so we thought this might be a case where they actually like someone kind of different than themselves, and at least initially. And that is what we find, that the opposites, the tightwads and spendthrifts, are more likely to end up together than kind of a two tightwad pair or a two spendthrift pair. And I think that's fun at first, probably especially for the tightwad, because they're not used to being around someone who's so flagrant with spending and loose, and it's probably exciting. But
You probably feel a little bit more spontaneous that way, or like free or carefree or something.
Yes. And that's fun. And sometimes shy people really love being with someone who's extroverted at first. But over time, as situations change, and certainly with spending, once you have to confront like kids and houses and helping parents who need it and all kinds of other big ticket things, these differences start to really they can stress out a couple.
Who usually wins in those stressful, moments, disagreements between spendthrifts and tightwads, if they're in a couple?
Yeah, right. Well, we find that tightwads win a lot of the battles, but spendthrifts tend to win the war. So, often, assuming this is something where both people need to like turn their key and kind of buy into it. The spendthrift is probably the one making the request or the, pitching their case for why we should do this. And the tightwad can say no, no, no. But a no is just, there's nothing permanent about no. But once you say yes, eventually you'll wear down the tightwad. They'll say yes. And then the money's spent. You can't get the refund on the cruise you're going on, or, it's, I mean, some physical goods, sure, you can get a refund. But once, you just need that one moment for the tightwad to say yes, and then the spendthrift wins. So tightwads can kind of delay the inevitable, but spendthrifts are usually not saying, okay, you said no, we'll turn the page. It doesn't really work like that.
So the tightwad is the bottle, and the spendthrift is the genie. Once you let that genie out, it's very tough to get him back, or her back. And
yes, the genie will run amok. But sometimes you should run amok. I mean, there are times when the spendthrift should win, and you should not go to Ruby Tuesdays for your anniversary dinner. And but yeah, you don't want the spendthrift winning like every time. That's probably not good.
Right. That could be financially catastrophic,
I would think.
No.
But you brought up a good example, right? You don't take, well, you shouldn't take your
on these moments of disagreement,
new bride.
It's worth looking. It's worth
your
bringing
spouse,
up. Well, you remember we went to Olive Garden last
White
year, and
Castle
it was kind of miserable
for an anniversary dinner.
It didn't really
how is it that
it wouldn't have made a
you
difference if we spent an extra $100 on
manage, or
dinner.
how should
And
couples who find themselves in this
I do
type
think
of
the spendthrifts
relationship,
can be good
how
at
do
kind
they
of
work through those conversations
laying
to
out a bigger
determine
picture. Like there are
when
things
it
in life
is
that
that
we need to have a
that the
life. It's not
spendthrift
just
should
numbers.
really
But
win, right?
um,
Should
And you're not
I
just
don't want
saying
to say
this
have
as the
their way, but
spendthrift.
where their way
it's
is
hard to
probably the
separate.
best
It's hard
way
to
at that
separate.
time.
But yeah, I'm married to a tightwad, and so uh, I'm mindful of their perspective. But I think there's a lot of arguments that are worth having and are useful. Hopefully they're not nasty, but there are disagreements. But there are some arguments that a mismatched couple get into that are just not worth it at all. And that's why I like we each have kind of a pocket of money that everyone knows about, but I don't need to get into the details of what you do with that money. I know you had my co-author Jenny Olson on here recently, and we have this paper on how joint accounts are kind of better for couples than separate accounts. We show that in an experiment, and I totally buy that. But I think even better than just a joint is a joint attached to two separate, and where you want to funnel all the incoming money in through the joint. You want to kind of do some psychological money laundering, so it's all our money.
I love that.
Psychological money laundering.
Yeah. You want to blur the difference in your money and my money. It's our money, especially if we have different incomes. So you launder it, and then we each get to take some of our money into our separate accounts, and we do what we want with it. I have a understanding of how much you've taken, but boy, I do not need to see the details. I don't need to see, oh, you spent this at Starbucks and this on lunch when you could have packed lunch. And I mean, like, oh, you have a hobby. Well, that's your hobby. That's your interest. I might not understand it. If you laid out all the numbers, it would be like crazy. You spent that on that. It's like, it's going to seem so overpriced. And people you need some individuality, and you need to maintain your interest. And so it's this. So I'm not
Yeah,
a
I mean,
lover of
and
like
you're
financial
what you're sharing
transparency. I call it
is
financial
that the hybrid
translucency.
of
Like
yours, mine, and
I
ours.
need an impression
right?
of what
Where
you're up to, but I don't need like
people
micro
write about the
level
effectiveness of that, and
details.
to the where most of the money, I guess it depends on the couple and what they decide is in their best interest for their relationship, but it's not uncommon for most of the money to be shared after it's been laundered. And then the yours and the mine, those two accounts that we each have on our own, where we don't have to explain in detail what we're doing with the money. It's our money. Isn't much, but it at least gives us some freedom to be able to, spend without resentment or questioning. So that explanation does make sense.
Yeah, your account and my account, but our money is what goes into the account. And as long as it all kind of starts out as ours from the get-go. Because I hear people have this 3-account structure, and sometimes it goes into separate, and people like chip into joint, and I don't love that approach. But
I never thought about that. Wow. I always made the assumption that you just kind of, it all is laundered and then it goes from there to one partner and then the other, rather than the other way around. Okay.
Yeah. No, I think the other way around is common. But I think you don't want to get into scorekeeping and I chipped in this percent. And I mean, the approach I'm pitching here is kind of, if you're on thin ice, if the couple is like kind of on the outs, like this is not the approach to take. Like my approach is like assuming things are kind of going well.
There's good communication.
There's good communication. And like it requires a lot of trust. And if things are unstable, yeah, sure, keep a foot out the door. maybe don't go
Right.
all in a joint account. And so it's, our experiment was with couples they were separate, but they were like toying with the idea of merging. So they were like open to it. And we just said, do it for some of them. And they benefited. But um,
But
yeah,
you found, which was groundbreaking, that pooling money as a couple actually causes more happiness in marriage. It's not a correlation; it causes,
yeah,
which truly is groundbreaking research. Says to the world, hey, there's no perfect way. Everyone's way is different, but just consider that on average, when you pool your money together, those marriages are happier.
yeah, yeah. No, it was that study was quite an adventure, as I'm sure Jenny relayed to you. But yeah, we kind of kept them at kind of baseline happiness, and whereas everyone else declined. And that is the common pattern, where like the happiest day is like, the wedding day roughly. And then because it usually starts off communal, where like I help you because you need it. Like you say, oh, can you do the dishes tonight? I'm exhausted. But then you slide into like a scorekeeping situation where it's like, can you do the dishes tonight? I did them last night.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to get into that. So we did find that the joint helped them kind of keep that initial absence of scorekeeping mindset, which seemed to help.
And I'm glad that you brought up the visual of the fact that on average that people are happiest just after they got married or before, and then it kind of looks like the slide on a playground
Yeah.
as you venture into the world of much more responsibility, and then you climb your way out as you're getting into your 50s, and the responsibility decreases, and usually your income increases.
Right. And yeah, and so many things, like you're learning more that people didn't reveal during the courtship, and some disillusionment can seep in.
Dr. Rick, do you find it slightly comical that our co-hosts Christian and Dr. Ross, one of which is newlywed, the other is recently engaged, have a look of a deer in a headlight right now, wondering, "Oh my God, what have I gotten into?"
Oh, I get the vibe already that these guys are going to be all good. But no, it's funny. I was starting to do this when I was engaged, and luckily my wife has been a good sport over the years about me kind of sharing our details very publicly, and now in a book. And I did have to get her to sign off on some anecdotes, but and one I had to get her family to sign off too. But
Wait a second. Okay, so we need to have a episode 2, if your wife is up to it.
oh, bring her in.
You two are hosts or as our guests together.
Well, I will. I'll bring that up. She's pretty open to stuff, so
that would be wonderful. Please let us know ASAP, and we will get that scheduled.
Very tempting. Yes.
Now we're laundering. We're laundering money. We're laundering reputations. It's a really beautiful thing.
It's a laundromat. And
what I'm struck by, Dr. Rick, in your comments so far is this notion of financial translucency, I believe you phrased it. Mm-hmm. That one of the ways that translucency or transparency in its extreme form can break down is through what experts call financial infidelity. So I'm wondering if you can take us through, how bad is financial infidelity in terms of, breaking down this translucency that you describe, and how much, and if you can give some real world examples, either from your partnership with your wife or folks that you've interviewed for your work, like how much detail should we be sharing with one another to, keep that translucency, translucent and not opaque?
Yeah. No, I mean, just the name financial infidelity, I don't love it. It sounds very tawdry. And, when I look at some of the examples that people give, it's like, well, you went to the grocery store, you spent $100 on groceries, you did a debit card purchase, and then you got $20 in cash on top of that, and you didn't tell me about the $20. So my goodness, if I looked at the statement, I would just think you spent $120 on groceries. I wouldn't realize you had this little $20 secret spending spree. So some of the violations don't seem that severe to me. I mean, there are real things. There are gambling addictions that go unnoticed, and shoring up the accounts, making everything transparent could help to put the brakes on that. But I think these kind of addictions are not financial problems. They involve money, but they're at the root of it. They're not. I mean, it's a separate fix. It's not for someone like me. It's medical people and psychiatrists, and it's a different thing. But I think people get into hiding because they feel like they have someone looking over them and judging purchases that are perfectly innocent or useful, but it's not what the other person would have bought. And so that's why I think you need to kind of get an aggregate sense of people, what they're up to, kind of a high level thing. But I think the details, my wife is a needle pointer. She's like a needlepoint influencer. And, I used to discover or ask about the cost of certain things. I don't need to know that. It all seems wildly overpriced to me. I mean, they're beautiful things, but if I had to guess what the materials cost, I would have guessed a much lower number. And I, because of the kids, we do baseball cards. And you can imagine, you spent what on a piece of cardboard? It's like, no, there's a market, and trust me, it's worth more than that. But
what's your favorite baseball card?
Well, I have the Griffey Upper Deck rookie.
So do I. Yeah. Where he's holding the bat, like over his shoulder.
The big smile. Yeah, that's why.
I love that.
Yes. But I didn't get that as a kid. I got that like a year ago. Now that I have some money to spend on that. But so you don't, you just want to avoid kind of the nitpicking over the little stuff, and just save the arguments for or the really intense discussions for the big ticket items, I think.
But you said the baseball card hobby is something you do with your son.
Uh-huh.
Right. So, and that is that something that you did as a child as well?
It is. It is. And I stopped for 30 years or whatever, but it's COVID and they found my cards in the attic while we were all locked down. I was like, oh yeah, you guys seem to like this. Sure. Let's, we can do that.
But is that a baseball card purchase, or is that a way in which you're using money to bring you and your kids closer together?
Yeah, I'd like to frame it that way.
So nice.
But, I definitely made some purchases when they weren't around. And, yeah, after they go to bed and hop on eBay and all that. But
it's probably the same with your wife and needlepoint, right? There's more value to that activity, that hobby, that passion. Whether it's the peace that she feels when she is stitching, or I don't know your wife, but there's more value to it than the materials, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, one of our boys, he goes with her to some needlepoint nights, and he has his little kid version. But but no, if we were kind of over each other's shoulder looking at statements, no, it would take the fun out of it. It would just kind of
it would make it a lot more tedious, I would imagine.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, so you're saying with the tightwads and spendthrifts, it's on a continuum. Like this is kind of on a continuum of what doesn't matter because it's just your personal enjoyment, and to an extent what should matter, and those bigger conversations.
Yes.
And so measuring what's worth it.
Yeah, that's right. Now, if you feel like things are kind of drifting into oh, this is getting into like, I get a sense that you might be going over kind of
Right. If it's
what we want to do.
dollars every day,
Yeah.
that's different than, $50 every.
Yes. So I the first step is what I suggest in the book is like call for like a self audit. Like, don't go straight for like, okay, we got to see statements. And I'd say, look at your own statements and just like check in with yourself. Are you kind of spending like, roughly as we planned, kind of keeping within our mutually understood boundaries? And then I just need to hear from you that you've done that, like that self audit. I don't need the detailed results. I just need to know that you've taken a close look. So again, this is very trust heavy, and we're all kind of adults here. But if the self audits don't work, then as a last resort, you might have to do something more transparent. But I would not start with like full unblinking transparency. It's break glass in emergency, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Are you engaged, recently married, or know someone who is? We are empowering engaged and recently married couples who want to manage money in the home as a team with a transition to marriage toolkit. Learn more at modernhusbands.com. Now back to the show.
Well, in the spirit of transparency, translucency, good communication, I'm curious about your thoughts about prenups, prenuptial agreements, especially with tightwad and spendthrift partners.
Yeah. I'm sure it can be done well. Looking at this from like a well-being and psychology perspective, I don't love prenups. I know a lot of people who work in law and like divorce attorneys who do think they're super important. And like from that perspective, I totally get it. From the perspective of keeping a marriage kind of happy, I'm not sure they're good. If they were mandatory, I think they'd be less bad. If just the state required it for you to get a marriage license, that you have to go through this process, that's better. But if someone has to bring it up, just the profound doubt that is expressed, it's so hard to shake off. So there's that, which is bad. But also there's research on like what happens when you have like a backup plan. And you can think of the prenup as like, well, if things go south, how will things work out? And when we have a very salient backup plan, we tend to be less, we pursue the kind of goal in front of us a little less vigorously. So rather than say kind of things are shaky, let's work it out, you might say things are shaky and let's kind of just accept that things are we're drifting apart, and we accept it. And not saying that all divorce is bad, of course. Some people should get divorced, but you might work less hard at the marriage if you have like this clear, obvious backup plan that you've kind of like clearly thought through, and it's very available to you in your memory. And so yeah, I don't like that looming over a marriage.
We actually had a prenup expert on during this series, Lori Israel, who was a prenup. She's an attorney, and she said the same thing that you said. She's actually very anti prenup in most cases. There's some cases where like if one of them comes in with great family wealth, or there's businesses involved and it's more complex. But she said the same thing she said, and there was something that she said that's really just stuck with me. It's that whoever the attorney is for the prenup is not writing a prenup to guarantee the success of your marriage. They're writing it to guarantee that you are financially protected, and those two things can be competing interests.
It's about the protection of the assets rather than the quality of the marriage.
Yes.
Now, some prenup lawyers are kind of artists. Like they'll say, yes, technically it's a prenup, but let's think of it more as like a plan for the marriage. And, just kind of airing kind of everyone's financial status. And, you know, I'm sure there's a way to kind of artfully do it, but I think more often than not, psychologically, I'm not in favor.
Well, if I was a prenup attorney, I would like prenups too.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And you know, it's true that if you know, if there's a contentious divorce, you probably are better off with like a customized prenup than just kind of whatever default your state has. And but boy, yeah. So again, it's my thing is like it's risky, it's trust, you know. So that's where that's the track I'm on. The high risk, high trust world. Yeah.
Let's change gears to sort of happier events. So when birthdays, holidays, anniversaries, etc., gift giving opportunities come up, what do you recommend for? Should we be asking our partners what kind of gifts they would like, or should we go for the surprise route, the ambush gift? Yeah, I'd be interested to hear from you what that looks like in one of these hybrid marriages between spendthrifts and tightwads.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, a couple thoughts here. So a lot of behavioral science suggests like, oh, just ask them what they want, get that. You avoid kind of the disaster, which is good. You want to avoid disasters.
Yes, you do, Dr. Rick. And I've had a few of those.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Described in the book. And, you know, those can really kind of leave a mark. And so I understand the risk averse approach there. But, you know, I think it's bad. I think the asking itself is a real turnoff, for lack of a better word. Like it's, you know, if you're asking like the night before Valentine's, like, what do you want? Like it's hard to do that question in a good, loving way. And you know, surprise is essential. We wouldn't have wrapping paper if surprise didn't matter. And so it's really about kind of learning about the inner psychological life of your partner, and that, you know, that has to be done kind of well in advance. And kind of what's keeping them up at night, what are they excited about, what are they dreading, what are they you know, what are some curiosities that they have. And so it's really, you got to learn about the partner. And don't ask, just kind of learn and then give the gift based on your mapping out of what their inner world looks like. And so there are questions that you can kind of go through and make it a date night and kind of, oh, you know, if you could have dinner with anyone, who would it be and why? And, you know, just kind of, you know, those kind of questions. So there's that. I say don't ask. It's different. I mean, that's for spouses, right? If it's a kid, that's another story. But yeah, another issue is that tightwads and spendthrifts, a good gift requires some sacrifice. I need to know that this wasn't just like you picked it up at Walgreens 10 minutes before you gave it to me. Like, there needs to be some sacrifice. And so if I'm a spendthrift and my partner's a tightwad and they're seeing me like spend a lot of money on myself all the time, and I get them like, oh, a new iPad, like it's nice, it's expensive, but they know that's no big deal for me at all because I just bought myself a new iPad and the new iPhone, and like I do this all the time. There's no sacrifice there. Now, if my tightwad spouse goes out and get me an iPad, that's something that probably hurt them. They don't like to spend all that money, so they can show sacrifice through like a big expenditure. Like, oh, I know that must have hurt. Whereas me as the spendthrift, I have to show sacrifice in a different way. I got to like find like a weird piece of memorabilia from your favorite band on eBay, or set up a picnic in the park, or like, you know, time, effort. You know, it's good for everyone, but especially for someone who's usually just kind of making problems go away by throwing money at it. So you got to, the spendthrift has to show this sacrifice a little differently.
Now you said that sometimes making a bad decision will leave a mark. So it sounds like there's a story there. Do you have one short story you can share about a decision that you made, a gift decision you made that you really don't want our listeners to make themselves?
Yeah. So it was one of our early Christmas occasions early in the marriage. And I knew she liked Kate Spade. She was really into that at the time. And I thought, oh, a new handbag. She hadn't had a new handbag in a while. And so I went and I saw a bunch of things that kind of looked about her style. But I also saw this kind of gold, gem encrusted, like really small, fancy bag that you might see like, someone wear at a very fancy event or like going out. It's the kind of bag I would want if I wore Kate Spade handbags. Like I thought, like fancy and flashy and like a conversation piece. Not at all her style, but it was like the most expensive one, the most flashy one. My spendthrift brain was like, obviously, you get the gold encrusted handbag. And I gave this to her. We were with her father and her brother in Pittsburgh, and they're great. And they're kind of like Pittsburgh guys. And she like opens this up in front of them and it's just like silence. It was just, I had laid an egg. It was so clear. And like her dad kind of summarized it the right way. He's like, what are you going to wear that down at the Kroger's? What? It wasn't her. It wasn't her. It just revealed that at that time, I did not have a good mapping of her taste and interest and style. It just, these gifts can really reveal that, oh, you don't know me that well, or at least kind of, you weren't diving deep on this particular occasion.
Did he say, at any point, did he say yins or yinzer?
Oh, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that.
Because I feel like it would make it sting worse.
Oh yeah.
Where yin's gonna wear that?
Exactly. So that was quickly returned, and before New Year's, that was back on the shelves at Kate Spade. But yeah, that was tough, and I just thought like, oh well, it's not her, but it's expensive and it's fun, and like the more I spend, like it's play it safe by spending more.
If you spend more, that means you love her more.
It's a signal. It's a signal,
right? Or at least that's kind of the initial thought process behind it.
But err on the side of overspending is, yeah, right.
Well, Dr. Rick, perhaps you can diagnose, and Dr. Ross, where I was coming from with my mark. Early in our marriage, I was working 2 jobs, and so my wife was home. And around Christmas time, she was complaining about 2 things. She said she doesn't exercise as much as she used to in college, and she wants to exercise more. And we had, I think, a hand-me-down vacuum. And so in my own mind, I thought, oh, okay, so she's facing 2 problems that she wants solved. So I will solve them. So I bought her for Christmas a new vacuum and a game called Dance Dance Revolution, a fitness game, believing that those 2 items would solve her problem and she would be thrilled with the Christmas gift. And that left a mark on a slight mark on my right cheek. And I learned quickly that gift giving is not the time for problem solving.
Right. Yes.
But see, at the same time, so I've gotten my fiance a vacuum, but she really wanted it. And so it was one of those like top of the line, like something that she would never spend on herself. And so like she's mentioned many times, like, oh, I'd love a vacuum like this. Like one of our old colleagues had one that she saw and used, and she was like, this is amazing. But it was like something way more than she would actually normally spend. So then she loved the vacuum. I didn't get a fitness game as well.
You could have just stopped at the vacuum. I'm thinking maybe your fiance and my wife
it was a high-end vacuum, something that I had been listening to that she really wanted. And so it was the thought of like actually doing something that she would have never done for herself, but she wanted.
I think it's great to get.
It's not the gift. It's like it's how it's perceived.
Yeah.
Or
don't do the vacuum, listeners. I know it worked for Dr. Ross, but I'm telling you, it's not worth the risk.
If you're going to do the vacuum, do it on a random Tuesday. Don't do it like for our anniversary.
Right. Well, we did get another vacuum, and then that was just a random Wednesday, I think.
Yeah.
Actually, after that one.
It's a very high stakes vacuum.
That's what everyone told me when I was getting the gift. But
well,
it's about knowing your partner.
Yes. But I do think surprise is important, and there are apps that you can get to kind of say like, oh, randomly remind me 6 times a year. Like, oh, can you get your spouse a gift today? Like maybe the answer is no. But it just kind of prompts you to think like, oh, can I do something special? And
because it's like if random times of the year are more powerful, right? Like more impactful, right? If it's just a random gift out of nowhere, is that true?
Yeah, no, I mean, think about they're expecting nothing. And so it doesn't need to be like a new car. Like it could just be something small, and it doesn't need to be over the top. And certainly if money's tight at that moment, you just kind of ignore that prompt. But it's good to kind of, we get distracted and bogged down in day-to-day life, but it's good to kind of, have these little reminders of spontaneity kind of built in. And
those are pretty good suggestions for like, how we can strengthen the relationship then through giving gifts that are meaningful and that have extra effort, but then also ones that are just kind of out of the blue that, you're showing that I'm thinking about you.
Yeah, that's right. It's important because we appreciate and admire our spouses more than we express that to them.
Absolutely.
So, and we just don't articulate it because we're tired or just not feeling like we can put it into words, or it's not the right time. So these gift-giving occasions are these really important moments to kind of actually show what we know and what we think of our partners. And because most of us are just not putting it into words as much as we probably should be. Yeah.
Or intend to do even.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Rick, you have kids. I know Brian, of course, has kids. Neither Dr. Ross nor I do. And so perhaps we can glean some wisdom from you in terms of, the power of actions over words when, imparting wisdom to the next generation of, little Ricks and little Pages. To what extent do actions speak louder than words when it comes to, imparting spending decisions and spending habits among our kids?
Yes. We do find when spouses are mismatched, like it's one thing if it's just us and you have this like habit that's kind of mildly irritating to me, it's whatever. But when there's a kid involved and like you might be kind of shaping how they behave, then these things kind of really kind of become more of a important issue. But like I said, tightwads and spendthrifts, they're conflicted. They don't love this part about themselves. And so you often see them give advice to their kids that is kind of different than what they do. The tightwad might say, they see their kid kind of mimicking their own tightwadism, and they might say, you can loosen up a little bit. Whereas a spendthrift might kind of reel in the kid a bit more. We see that in studies where we have parents and kids talk about money decisions. And we see the parents of the kind of extreme parents giving the kid kind of opposite of what they would do, advice.
It's a do as I say, not as I do kind of situation.
Exactly. But for better or worse, what the kids end up doing is usually what they see the parents do. And, when the parent says and does different things, it's usually what the parent does that kind of predicts the kid's behavior.
Well, that modeling is so strong. I mean, it's such a strong, modeling is such a strong.
Yes. And so, doing this kind of work, it kind of reminds me as a spendthrift to at least perform a little more tightwadism in front of my kids. Don't make things that are totally painless to me seem that way. At least voice, articulate some kind of internal struggle, and say no to some things that I would have. My natural instinct is to say yes to, and if I'm going to do like some kind of more splurgy spending, like maybe after bed, after they're asleep, and just out of their view. So just kind of being mindful of just their kind of picking up all these patterns that they're seeing. Because we do find that kids, as they go into adulthood, they tend to look like the parents on this continuum. It's, it's certainly, they're not identical. And, there are things you can do to shake it, particularly in early adulthood, but eventually people we turn into our parents, for better or worse.
For better or worse.
Yes.
I feel like this is becoming even higher stakes these days. So many products and advertisements being targeted at younger consumers, and recognizing that some of those younger consumers might be observing, prior generations, their families making spending decisions one way and then telling them another. Really helping people make the best spending decisions per se for themselves.
Yes. And the kids they're making their own decisions with whatever money they can cobble together, but they're also a persuasive agent, coercing me into spending things. And, I've had to learn that, if they kind of, coerce a purchase at Target, if I say no to 99 things and finally say, oh, sure, fine. There's not going to be any celebration at home for saying no to the 99 things. The focus will be on the thing I bought for them.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And they are only too eager to kind of publicly report like, oh, dad bought us this. Like, so
I'm sure your wife doesn't resent that at all.
No, I mean, it's, there are questions that are raised. Like, but, I said, we had a situation in the store. I had to put out this fire, but
now sound like
just
a kind of secretary, Dr. Rick.
What's that?
You've got very diplomatic answers here on there was a situation. The situation was handled in a certain way. You discuss the particulars, but next question, please.
Yes, exactly. Next question.
I remember reading in Ron Lieber's book, The Opposite of Spoiled, just that allowance is a tool. And I gotta say, like, one of the best tips that I got was recognizing that allowance should just be given as a tool, and that you should never have strings attached to allowance, because let's say the string that is attached is that they have to do their chores. They can just say, well, I'm not doing my chores. So we just established, no, you're going to do your chores because you're a part of the family, and you're going to get an allowance for you to make decisions. So then when we go to Target and when our kid pesters us about buying something, I can just say, well, that's what you get an allowance for. So if you really want it, you can buy it. That's what makes it so much easier. Because you're not saying no. You're just saying,
Yeah, right.
You decide.
You decide. Yeah, that is a nice thing about them having kind of their own money, for sure. So no, I think that's good advice. I have been wanting to do a study of kind of the proper way to kind of administer an allowance. I think there's some cool work that can be done there. But yeah, it's been a learning process, both at home and in the lab. It's yes.
So when we're out and we're looking for marriage, we're finding that partner, there's always that kind of phrase of like marrying for love or money, right? It's a this or that kind of thing. Is both a reasonable answer? Like, or is it a love versus money? I'm guessing there's probably another continuum there, right?
Right. Yeah. No, I think, first of all, marrying for money, like it can happen, but as a strategy, it's, people who have money are usually going to marry someone else with money. Like it's hard to like jump into.
That goes back into like kind of similar circles that you're running.
Yes, exactly.
You're meeting similar people, right?
And even if you do, like, are they eager to like share it and say, oh yeah, it's half of everything, it's our money, like maybe, but maybe not.
Maybe.
Yeah. So it's not even like a viable approach. And like love, but you need like a certain amount to avoid kind of misery. And so it's a component, and love is obviously a big component too, both kind of the passionate love at first and more the companion kind of love over time. And
yeah.
But you can still have both of those things. And we have the money, we love each other, but you want to be on a farm and raise 6 kids, and I want to live in the city with like maybe 1 kid. And we just have very different interest and lifestyle choices. And love and money, it's not enough to do both. You need to. So what I say is you have to marry for well-being. And that requires love and it requires enough money, but it also requires that there's enough similarity in taste and interest and kind of a viewpoint on the world that you won't be kind of miserable with each other, even if you are in love. So that's why, as dorky as it sounds, I think it's good to have things like, a Star Wars dating night where you kind of, you find your people, and you kind of find people with similar interests, and then kind of explore from there. Is there love? Is there money? But just kind of start off looking for kind of, people with similar taste, and kind of, because that can really eat away at a marriage, kind of if you're too dissimilar on kind of these lifestyle issues. So yeah, it's a lot of check boxes for a good marriage.
I love the simplicity of the statement. You have to marry for well-being, because that really does tie everything together, because it's such a complicated decision with all these moving parts, these changing variables, right? We like to leave the podcast. We like to leave our listeners with like one simple actionable step that they can take, or piece of wisdom that they can take to apply to their real lives. So based on your research and what you shared in your book, what would that one thing be?
Well, I mean, it's a big to-do list, but I like the kind of gift on a non-occasion. Start there, assuming things are going well and you can swing it. Just go out and do that. Something in the neighborhood of like flowers, or kind of whatever that equivalent is for your spouse. And, just add some surprise and some delight. And then kind of, move into some of the heavier topics we discuss, like account structure and what the kids are exposed to. And those are longer term projects. But, you can start by adding some fun and surprise.
You heard it, listeners. More spontaneity will give you more success in your marriage. That's a great tip that I think I'm going to use myself in the coming weeks. But that gift will not be a vacuum. I have learned that. Dr. Rick, thank you for sharing your wisdom today for our listeners. We will share everything about Dr. Rick's book, like where you can purchase it, in our show notes. And that is on our website at modernhusbands.com. You can find our podcast there. So again, please go out and buy Tightwads and Spendthrifts, Navigating the Money Minefield in Real Relationships. It's been a great conversation, Dr. Rick. Thank you.
I've had fun. Thank you so much for having me.
A special thanks to our guest and, of course, to all of our listeners. Don't forget to click subscribe wherever you download your podcast, give us a rating, and share the Modern Husbands podcast with others. Doing so goes a long way in growing our reach. And join your fellow Modern Husbands and have links to our podcasts, articles, and other resources to manage money in the home as a team sent to your inbox every 2 weeks by subscribing to our newsletter at modernhusbands.com. Until next time, be well.